December 19th, 1943. RAF Medmenham, Buckinghamshire, England. Flight Officer Sarah Whitmore leans closer to the stereoscope, her breath fogging the eyepiece in the unheated analysis room. Outside, winter rain hammers against the windows of the Central Interpretation Unit, but inside, her world has narrowed to two overlapping aerial photographs taken 48 hours earlier over the Krupp proving grounds near Kummersdorf, Germany. She adjusts the focus wheel. The twin images merge into three-dimensional clarity, and there it is again, that shadow, that impossible shadow. Section Leader Bennett? Her voice cuts through the cigarette haze. You need to see this. Squadron Leader Margaret Bennett crosses the room, her footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. She's analyzed thousands of reconnaissance photos since 1940, factories, airfields, rail yards, U-boat pens. She knows the shape of every German tank in production. The Panzer IV's angular hull, the Tiger I's boxy turret, the Panther's sloped glacis plate. This is none of those. The shadow measures nearly 11 meters long. The turret, if that's what it is, appears wider than a Tiger's entire hull. Bennett marks the photo with a grease pencil, calculating scale against the nearby buildings. Her hand pauses mid-stroke. That can't be right, she mutters. Whitmore's already running the calculations on her notepad. If the scale's accurate, ma'am, that track width is nearly 4 meters. The Tigers are less than a meter each. Bennett straightens, her mind racing through possibilities. A decoy? The Germans have been building inflatable tanks to fool Allied bombers. But this shadow has depth, dimension, weight pressed into the muddy ground beneath it. And there's something else. Blast marks in the surrounding earth, consistent with weapons testing. Within an hour, the photographs are on the desk of Wing Commander Douglas Kendall, Chief of Allied Central Interpretation Unit. By evening, they've reached MI6 headquarters in London. By midnight, copies are being studied in Washington. The intelligence community christens it Project Maus, a dismissive codename that would prove grimly ironic. British analysts are skeptical. The Americans call it impossible. A tank that size would be too heavy to cross bridges, too slow to maneuver, too expensive to mass produce. Hitler's engineers must be bluffing, or the Führer's megalomania has finally detached completely from military reality. But buried in the intercepted communications, fragments decoded by the Bletchley Park codebreakers are references that don't match the mockery. Porsche, Krupp, special steel requisitions, railway flat cars reinforced beyond normal specifications. And a designation that appears repeatedly in Wehrmacht engineering reports, Panzerkampfwagen 8, the 8th Panzer class, something beyond the Panzer VII Lova, itself cancelled as impractical at 70 tons. In a fortified underground facility near Böblingen, Germany, Dr. Ferdinand Porsche stands before a full-scale wooden mock-up that dwarfs the engineers surrounding it. At 68 years old, Porsche has designed racing cars, luxury automobiles, and now, at Hitler's personal request, the largest armored fighting vehicle ever conceived. The Führer's vision is clear, a breakthrough weapon, an unstoppable fortress on tracks that will shatter Soviet tank formations and restore German superiority on the Eastern Front. Porsche knows the challenges. He's calculated the weight, the engine requirements, the metallurgical limits. But this is not merely engineering. This is ideology made steel, and in the Third Reich, ideology trumps physics. The mock-up's dimensions are staggering. Height, 3.66 meters. Width, 3.67 meters. Length, 10.2 meters with gun forward. And the estimated weight, classified as Geheime Kommandosache, secret command matter, approaches 200 metric tons. Porsche calls it Mäuschen, little mouse. The name will be formalized to Maus. The Allies won't stop laughing until they see the blueprints. March 12, 1944. Krupp Steelworks, Essen, Germany. Oberstleutnant Hans-Werner von Kielmansegg stands in the cavernous assembly hall, watching a 40-ton turret rotate on its bearing ring with the grinding screech of metal on metal. The sound echoes off walls blackened by 3 years of Allied bombing raids. Above, hastily repaired skylights let in weak morning light that glints off armor plate stacked like enormous playing cards. He's been sent by General Oberst Heinz Guderian himself, the architect of blitzkrieg warfare, to assess whether this colossal project deserves continued resources while the Eastern Front hemorrhages men and material. What he sees defies every principle of armored warfare he's championed since Poland. The hull assembly occupies an area larger than a tennis court. Welders in leather aprons move along its length, their torches spitting blue-white flame. The front glacis plate alone measures 240 millimeters thick, thicker than most tank turrets. Kielmansegg produces his leather-bound notebook and records the specifications Chief Engineer Carl Sachs rattles off with evident pride. Main armament, 128 mm KWK-44, L55. Secondary, coaxial 75 mm KWK-44, L36.5. Engine, Daimler-Benz MB515 diesel, developing 1,200 horsepower. Kielmansegg does the arithmetic in his head, 1,200 horsepower to move 200 tons. The Tiger I, already criticized for being underpowered, has 700 horsepower for 57 tons. This behemoth will have a power-to-weight ratio of 6 horsepower per ton. A Panzer IV manages nearly 15. Maximum speed, he asks, though he already knows the answer will be devastating. 20 kilometers per hour on roads, perhaps 13 cross-country. Sachs hesitates. In optimal conditions. The optimal conditions, Kielmansegg knows, don't exist in the muddy vastness of the Eastern Front or the cratered landscapes of Western Europe. He thinks of the bridges this machine would encounter, most rated for 30 tons, perhaps 40. The Maus would plunge through them like a stone through paper. River crossings? Sachs brightens slightly. Herr Dr. Porsche has designed a snorkel system. The Maus can ford rivers up to 8 meters deep, moving along the bottom while sealed. It's ingenious. It's also insane. Kielmansegg imagines this 200-ton fortress crawling across a riverbed, hoping the banks don't collapse, hoping the engine doesn't flood, hoping Soviet tanks aren't waiting on the opposite shore while the Maus emerges at walking speed. But he keeps his expression neutral. In the Reich, skepticism toward the Führer's pet projects is career-ending, or worse. Across the English Channel, the skepticism flows more freely. March 15, 1944. Combined Intelligence Objectives Subcommittee, London. Major General Kenneth Strong spreads the latest reconnaissance photos across the conference table. These aren't the grainy long-distance shots from December. These are close-ups, taken by an RAF Mosquito pilot who pushed his luck too far over Kummersdorf and nearly didn't make it home. The images show details. Track links the size of automobile hoods, a gun barrel that extends past the hull like a medieval lance. And most revealing, a measuring stick placed against the hull by German engineers, visible in one frame. Colonel William Dixon from War Office Intelligence taps the photo with his pipe stem. If these measurements are accurate, we're looking at armor no Allied tank gun can penetrate. Not the 76 mm Sherman, not even the 17-pounder on the Firefly. Aircraft, someone suggests? Perhaps, but it would take multiple direct hits, and if the Germans deploy these in battalion strength, they won't. Strong's voice carries certainty. They can't. The resources required to build even a dozen would cripple their tank production. This is a propaganda weapon, gentlemen. Steel for the newsreels. But in his briefcase lies a decoded Wehrmacht communication that troubles him. First prototype field trials approved. Target delivery, Kummersdorf Proving Ground, May 1944. Not propaganda. Reality. In Germany, the first Maus, designated V1, sits nearly complete, a monument to engineering ambition and strategic delusion. Its tracks have never touched Earth outside the assembly building. Its gun has never fired in anger. But it exists. June 23, 1944. Kummersdorf Proving Ground, 40 kilometers south of Berlin. The earth trembles. Hauptmann Josef Thyssen feels it through the soles of his boots, a rhythmic shudder like distant artillery, except it's getting closer. He stands beside the observation bunker, binoculars raised, watching the tree line where the access road emerges from the pine forest. Then he sees it. The Maus breaks through the foliage like a prehistoric beast, track plates chewing into the soft ground, diesel exhaust billowing black against the summer sky. Even at this distance, 400 meters, the scale is wrong, offensive to the eye. Tanks should be sleek, predatory. This is a mobile fortress, advancing at the speed of a leisurely walk. Thyssen checks his stopwatch. The Maus has covered 200 meters in 90 seconds. 13 kilometers per hour, matching Sachs's optimistic projections, but only because the ground is firm and flat. He's watched Panzer IV's race across this same terrain at 40 kilometers per hour, kicking up dust plumes visible for miles. Through his binoculars, he can see the test crew commander, Oberleutnant Ernst Hasse, visible from the waist up in the open commander's hatch. The turret rotates left, the massive 128mm gun barrel sweeping across the horizon. The hydraulic traverse system whines audibly even at this distance, another vulnerability. Mechanical complexity means mechanical failure, and the Maus is complex beyond measure. The test protocol calls for a river crossing demonstration. 100 meters ahead lies an artificial obstacle, a trench 8 meters wide flooded to simulate a river. The engineers have spent 3 days preparing, checking seals, installing the snorkel system, running diagnostic tests on the specialized diesel engines. Thyssen radios the bunker, beginning underwater traverse test. The Maus doesn't hesitate at the water's edge. It simply drives forward, nose down, and disappears beneath the surface with a surge that sends waves lapping against the banks. The snorkel tube, a periscope-like apparatus, remains visible, exhaust gurgling from its top. For 90 seconds, nothing happens, just the snorkel, stationary, while beneath the muddy water, 200 tons of steel crawl across the trench bottom at walking speed. Then the bow breaches on the opposite bank. Water cascades off the glacis pate as the Maus hauls itself up and out, tracks finding purchase, engine roaring. Thyssen allows himself a moment of genuine admiration. As a technical achievement, it's extraordinary. As a weapon of war, it's a dinosaur entering an age of mammals. The reality is inescapable now. In June 1944, the Allies have landed at Normandy. Soviet armies are grinding westward through Belarusia. The Luftwaffe is losing air superiority, and the Reich is pouring resources into a tank that requires specialized railway cars for transport, can't cross most bridges, consumes fuel at catastrophic rates, and would present an irresistible target for Allied fighter bombers. Thyssen has seen the combat reports from Normandy. Jabos, fighter bombers, swarm over German armor like hornets. The Typhoon's rockets, the Thunderbolt's bombs, they strike from above, where even 240mm armor doesn't help. The Maus, lumbering across open terrain at 13 kilometers per hour, would be a sitting duck. But the tests continue, because at Berchtesgaden, Hitler pores over scale models and demands production numbers. Because Porsche and Krupp have staked their reputations on delivering the Führer's vision. Because in the Alice in Wonderland logic of the Third Reich's final years, fantasy must be pursued even as reality collapses. A second prototype, V2, is already under construction, fitted with a different turret, modified transmission. The engineers speak hopefully of improvements, refinements, solutions to teething problems. They don't speak about the fundamental impossibility of the concept itself. Behind Soviet lines, intelligence officers are receiving reports from deep cover agents, fragments of information, intercepted communications. A picture assembling piece by piece of something the Red Army hasn't encountered before. The giant is real, and soon it will be theirs. April 14, 1945. Kummersdorf Proving Ground. The sound that wakes Feldwebel Otto Carius at 0400 hours isn't thunder. It's Katyusha rockets, Stalin's organs, screaming overhead, impacting somewhere west of the facility. The Soviet Third Guards tank army is 40 kilometers away and closing fast. Carius stumbles from the barracks into pre-dawn darkness lit by distant fires. The evacuation order came through at midnight. Destroy everything, fall back to Berlin. But the two Maus prototypes present a unique problem. V1 and V2 sit in the Proving Grounds vehicle park like beached whales, too massive to move quickly, too valuable to leave intact. Oberleutnant Hasse, the test commander, has already made his decision. V2, the newer prototype with the modified turret, will be destroyed in place. Its engine is disassembled for maintenance, and there's no time to reassemble. Demolition charges are already being positioned around the hull. But V1 is operational. Barely. We drive it north toward Wunsdorf, Hasse tells the assembled skeleton crew. His voice carries the exhaustion of men who haven't slept properly in weeks. If we can't get it across the Spree, we scuttle it in the river. Either way, it doesn't fall into Russian hands intact. Karius, a veteran panzer driver who's guided everything from Panzer IIIs to King Tigers, climbs into V1's driver position. The interior smells of diesel, grease, and sweat. The control layout is familiar yet alien. Similar instruments but scaled up, heavier, more resistant. He's driven tanks into combat across Russia. This will be his strangest journey yet. At 5:50 hours, V1's engines cough to life. Behind them, V2 erupts in a massive explosion as the demolition charges detonate. The blast wave rocks V1, and through his vision slit, Karius sees the turret of V2 lifted bodily off its mounting ring, tumbling through the air to land 20 meters away with earth-shaking impact. They're committed now. The Maus grinds forward into the dawn, moving north along roads cratered by artillery, past burning vehicles and abandoned equipment. They pass refugees, German civilians fleeing westward, their belongings piled on carts. The sight of the massive tank brings momentary wonder to faces otherwise locked in trauma and exhaustion. By 800 hours, they've covered 12 kilometers. 12 kilometers in nearly 3 hours. A Panzer IV could have made it in 20 minutes. Soviet reconnaissance aircraft appear overhead, Yak-9s, flying low, circling like vultures. Karius expects the attack any moment, Sturmovix with their 37mm cannons, or Il-2s with bombs, but the aircraft maintain distance. Perhaps they're as confused as everyone else by this steel leviathan. Radio communications are fragmentary, corrupted by static and desperate voices reporting Soviet breakthroughs everywhere. The front isn't a line anymore. It's a chaos of penetrations, encirclements, last stands. At 11:30 hours, disaster. The road ahead drops into a shallow valley where a stone bridge crosses a creek. The bridge is rated, according to the fated sign, for 15 tons. Haas makes the call immediately. "We're not getting across that. Prepare demolition." The crew works quickly, placing explosive charges on the engine mounts, the gun breech, the turret ring, anywhere critical. They've been trained for this contingency. Deny the enemy intelligence, deny them technological advantage. But there's no time. Through the trees comes the distinctive clatter of Soviet T-34 tracks, multiple vehicles closing fast. Karius estimates 5 minutes, perhaps less. "Go, everyone out!" Haas's command is sharp. The crew abandons the Maus, scrambling down the hull, running for the tree line. Karius is last out, pausing at the commander's hatch to look back at this mechanical monument to ambition and hubris. The charges are set for a 5-minute delay. They should have 10 minutes head start before a T-34-85 breaks through the northern tree line, its 85mm gun swinging toward the Maus. The Soviet commander must think it's operational, must see it as threat rather than abandoned hulk. The first round strikes the turret face. The sound is tremendous, metal on metal, but the armor holds. The shell ricochets skyward. A second T-34 appears, then a third. They're firing now from multiple angles, rounds sparking off armor that their guns cannot penetrate. Karius runs, hearing the impacts behind him, each strike a bell tone of invulnerable steel. It's almost fitting, the Maus, in its final moments, proving the one thing it was designed to do. It cannot be destroyed by tank fire. But it doesn't need to be destroyed by tanks. The demolition charges detonate at 11:42 hours. The explosion is visible from 5 kilometers away, a column of black smoke rising into the overcast sky. When Soviet engineers reach the site 3 hours later, they find a gutted hull, a turret blown clear, and fragments of the most advanced armor technology Germany has produced. They also find V2 back at Kummersdorf, its turret displaced but its hull largely intact. And in the months to come, Soviet metallurgists will study the armor composition, the gun design, the engineering solutions. They'll learn from the Maus's innovations and from its failures. The giant mouse that Allied intelligence mocked, that German engineers built, that Hitler demanded, it fought no battles, destroyed no enemies, changed no outcomes. But it stands now as monument to an empire's final, desperate grasp at technological salvation. May 4, 1945, Soviet-occupied Kummersdorf. Captain Mikhail Sokolov of the Red Army's Technical Intelligence Unit steps through the shattered gate of the proving ground, his boots crunching on broken glass and spent shell casings. 3 days have passed since Berlin's fall. The war in Europe has 72 hours left to run. What he finds in the vehicle park defies immediate comprehension. The turret, V2's turret, sits upright in a crater like a misplaced monument, its 128mm gun barrel pointed accusingly at the sky. The hull lies 50 meters away, partially buried, armor plates peeled back by the demolition charges but still fundamentally intact. Sokolov has examined captured Panthers and Tigers, studied their engineering, measured their armor. This is something else entirely. He produces a measuring tape, the glacis plate. 240 millimeters. His hand trembles slightly as he records the figure. Soviet tank armor maxes out at 120 millimeters on the IS-2. The Americans' M26 Pershing manages 102 millimeters. This German monster has twice that protection. Within weeks, the Maus remnants are on trains heading east, not just V2's hull and turret, but every fragment that survived the demolitions, every blueprint recovered from abandoned offices, every engineering report pulled from fire-damaged filing cabinets. In Moscow, metallurgists will analyze the armor composition, discovering the sophisticated face-hardened steel that made it so resistant to penetration. The Soviets will take the lessons learned and apply them to their own super-heavy tank projects, the IS-7, the Object 279. None will enter production. The same problems that doomed the Maus doomed them all: impossible weight, limited mobility, resource intensity that no economy can sustain. Across the Atlantic, American intelligence officers compile their own assessments based on captured documentation and interrogations of surviving engineers. Dr. Ferdinand Porsche, arrested by American forces in Austria, provides detailed testimony about the Maus program. His pride in the technical achievement is evident even as he acknowledges the strategic futility. The reports circulate through the Pentagon, annotated with observations. Represents peak of heavy armor development, one analyst writes, also represents dead end. Future is in mobility, air power, combined arms. Squadron leader Margaret Bennett receives a final briefing on the Maus in September 1945, including photographs taken by Soviet engineers. She remembers that December morning in 1943, peering through the stereoscope at shadows that seemed impossible. Now she sees the reality. The gutted hulls, the displaced turret, the engineering drawings spread across her desk. "We were right to mock it," she tells her colleagues, "and wrong to think it didn't matter." Because the Maus did matter, not as a weapon, but as a symbol. It represented the Third Reich's fundamental disconnect from reality in its final years. The belief that engineering prowess alone could reverse military catastrophe, that superweapons could substitute for sound strategy, that ideology could override physics and economics. Hitler demanded wonder weapons while his armies collapsed. He got the Maus, the V2 rocket, the Me-262 jet fighter. Technological marvels rushed into production too late, in too few numbers, at catastrophic cost to conventional production. The resources poured into 2 Maus prototypes could have built 50 Panzer IVs. The steel in their armor could have armored a company of Panthers. Today, in the Kubinka Tank Museum outside Moscow, portions of the Maus sit under museum lights. V2's turret mounted on V1's hull, a Frankenstein hybrid assembled by Soviet engineers from the salvaged remains. Visitors photograph it, marvel at its scale, struggle to comprehend how something so massive ever moved. The plaques tell the technical specifications, they don't tell the human stories. Thyssen watching it lumber across the proving ground, knowing it was already obsolete. Carius driving it north toward oblivion. Hayes setting demolition charges on a machine that represented thousands of hours of engineering brilliance and strategic blindness. The Maus stands now as the heaviest tank ever built, a record unlikely to ever be broken because modern warfare has no use for such dinosaurs. Main battle tanks today weigh less than half what the Maus did, yet carry more lethal firepower and vastly better mobility. The future proved to be smaller, faster, smarter, not heavier. In the end, the Allies were right to mock Hitler's giant Maus. They were mocking not just a tank, but an entire philosophy of warfare that had already been rendered obsolete by the very conflict it was designed to win. The Maus was born too late, too slow, and too heavy for the war that killed it. It remains, frozen in museum displays, a 200-ton reminder that in warfare, as in evolution, the biggest doesn't always survive. Sometimes the biggest just makes the best target.